Welcome to the CX Sports Podcast. With us, you will discover how to unlock the potential of your team and how to make the right decisions for your club off the pitch. Welcome, everyone, to another CX Sports Podcast. Here we're turning Davids into Goliaths. We're making those small town teams and small sports teams around the world into the big leagues that they deserve to be, and every fan knows they are. I'm your host, Jasper, and with me today is a CEO and founder of CX Sports, Dom Einhorn. Thank you so much, Dom.
Thanks for having me, Jasper. Good seeing you.
First of all, congratulations on another win by CX Sports flagship team, Salah Rugby. I think you guys are at the top of the league right now.
I think we are. Last time I checked, yes, we were, yeah.
Fantastic. All right. Well, speaking of Salah Rugby, they've been through a lot this year, especially with rebranding. And that's the topic I want to focus on today. And it's not always one that fans are comfortable with, but it's a pretty crucial step. So can you walk us through what exactly is rebranding?
Yeah, probably the easiest way to explain it is by taking our course of action, right? So we inherited a team that's 118 years old. That tongue-in-cheek we call the 118-year-old startup. Obviously, most logos that were interesting 118 years ago are probably in most likelihood no longer that interesting today. So you actually have to go through phases where you actually need to take a look at your brand and need to refresh it. Our latest refresh, I think, was 40, 50 years ago when we had the team. So one of my first questions, which was a naive one, when I first saw the logo, when I came on board, was, well, I see there's an animal there, but is it a grass snake or a freshwater eel? But it was supposed to be a salamander.
Oof.
So clearly we had an issue, and most people didn't know what the animal was either. Then we had a name that was a mile long. When in fact we're only doing two things: we're playing rugby and in the town of Salah, hence the term, the new rebranding the Salah Rugby. But I think taking a broader view on rebranding, as its name indicates, you start with an existing brand and you redo it, you rebrand it, which means that you make amends, you make edits to what's already in place. And ideally, when you're rebranding something, the first question you ask yourself is, what is our objective as a team? How are we going to be delineating ourselves from the team next door? How are we going to stand out from the crowd, knowing it's a crowded field? In France, for example, you have over 2,000 amateur rugby teams. What is going to make yours different? What is the reason why, as a fifth division amateur rugby team, everybody knows us today in the field of rugby in France and not the others, right? It just doesn't happen by mistake. You know, I wish you could get this lucky, but it takes time, effort, forward thinking in order to make it happen. You're part of that process yourself, so you know what I'm talking about. But it's a fundamental question every team needs to ask themselves, because we're talking about their identity. If you cannot define your identity in one or two sentences, you're missing the point. What makes your team different from the team next door? Why would a journalist be interested in talking and covering your team, right? So we've systematically asked ourselves those questions. We systematically also tried successfully to generate some controversy, which is part of every media plan.
Right.
As we say in the U.S., dog bites man is not news. Man bites dog is news. So you want to be that man who bites the dog, and that's how you stand out from the crowd.
Oof, that sounds like a lot of work, and really important work for every team out there. What are the key steps that go into rebranding, or is it just a question of a fresh coat of paint?
Excellent question. I think the key step, there's one fundamental step that comes into the decision making. Are you ready or not to do something different? Are you satisfied with your current brand? When I mean the current brand, it's not just your logo, it's not just your website and how it's being perceived visually speaking, but how do people know you? How do people find out about you? How does your brand resonate with your key stakeholders in your own little town, in the region, in your country, if you actually are known within your country, and internationally, if that's what your intent is. Clearly, if your team intends to stay a tiny local brand, that's one thing. But if you intend, as we do at Sala Rugby, to resonate with everybody and actually generate large followings in other parts of the world, the strategy is going to be completely different. But at the core, your brand needs to have an immediate impact. Whoever is following you, whoever is interested in you, should be able to see clearly, distinctly, within 3 seconds, who you are and what you do. So the 3-second test, the hook, as we call it, needs to be present, no matter what it is you're trying to achieve.
All right. Well, let's say, Dom, that I'm the owner of a small team. I wish. And I was coming to you and I say, Dom, my team's got a lot of potential. I want to take it to the next level. I want to go up a division. But my brand isn't fresh. What are the things about a team that are going to need to change throughout the rebranding process?
Well, if you came to us with that line of thinking, we would probably be able to work together, number one, because you've already made the proactive decision that there's changes required. You've already told yourself, you've already met with your board, and you said, look, we need to change. We need to evolve. We need to make a step forward. That's the biggest decision to be made. At that point in time, once that decision is made, we would sit down, we would talk to each other, and we would try to identify your strengths and your weaknesses of your brand. We would try to minimize the weaknesses. We would try to amplify the strengths. And we would clearly, with laser focus, zero in on your identity and what you can defend, what makes you different from every other team, because that's your core, that's your persona, that is your DNA. Because very often what you see when people rebrand, they rebrand artificially. What I mean by that is they're trying to be someone they're not, as you so often see on social media. But that's not sustainable in the long run. Very quickly, that's a house of cards that just falls apart, because underneath that veneer, everybody will see who you are. So the brand that you're looking to build has to be 100% aligned with your inner beliefs, and you have to be able to deliver on that brand so it doesn't fall apart.
What does CX Sports help teams get in terms of tools to deliver that brand, that image that they know they have, to their fans and to new fans? What are the tools?
Yeah, so there are some key and fundamental tools, most of which are digital. And when we talk about the digital space, obviously that's in the amateur sports world very often scares smaller teams, because they think that just because they're small, they have a lack of resources, they're unable to compete. That may have been true 15, 20 years ago. That's no longer the case today. Today, those tools have been largely democratized. The access to the technology required is ubiquitous when it wasn't before. It's also a lot cheaper than it has ever been. If I go back 20 years ago, my monthly web hosting bill was $8,000 a month. Today, I'm using 1,000 times more bandwidth, and it's costing me less than $100 a month. So you can see that technology has come a very, very long way. What our job here is at CX Sports is to actually develop these technologies and virtually hand deliver them to a team so they don't have to recreate them on their own. And again, every time we do deploy one of these initiatives, we test it first internally on our test bed in our lab called Sala Rugby. If it works, we move forward with it at Sala Rugby first, and then our intent is to platformize it so as to make it scalable so we can offer it to other teams, which is already something we're doing today.
Last week on our podcast, we talked about one branded tool in particular. I think it's called the browser extension. And this is one tool that not just helps with branding, but also with revenue. And it's particularly relevant right now with the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, so the browser extension is a plugin, for lack of a better term, that's white labeled to the colors, look and feel, the identity of the club that we just discussed. You basically, as a fan, shop from your favorite merchants. There is no change in behavior that's required. You do what you always do. Whoever your favorite merchant is, that's who you buy from. In most cases, we are affiliated with that merchant. The merchant then earmarks a small portion of the transaction, which is typically called the affiliation fee, that we collect and we redistribute to the teams that we work with.
Right. Well, that sounds like a tool that any club could benefit from. But let's get back to rebranding, especially with the Sala Rugby Club. You guys have done a lot here with the club. And I want to know, what were the key steps of that process that you had to tackle, and which would you say were the most important and most successful?
I think the key step was to first get everybody on board, get the board on board, if there's such a term, and making sure that everybody understands the decision we would take. It wasn't easy because obviously there are a lot of history in the club, a lot of people that have been with the club for some of them 50, 60 years. That are not necessarily inclined towards new technologies, rebranding, etc. They're very much set in their ways, but we were successful in doing so. And then I think the most interesting part is how we were able to parlay little steps into incremental wins. Again, starting with the logo, building first a website in French. Today we have a website in English, French, German, and Spanish.
Wow.
Building mobile apps, building a global media presence, building a SalaRugby.tv with live streaming of games and training segments, and then basically reaching out to sponsors and convincing those sponsors that Sala Rugby is probably a brand they should align themselves with, which is also working out well today. But I think the most important thing, which we're still in the process of proving out, is that all of these initiatives that we have dedicated towards building the brand, building the team on the business side actually can translate on the pitch, and that's what we're seeing. We're in the early innings of that right now.
Well, I think that's an amazing story, and I think a lot of clubs are going to be interested. If they were to come to you and say, CX Sports, I want your help, what's the timeline they're going to look at for this rebranding process, assuming they're already in the right mindset?
So rebranding does take time. Obviously, you're not going to be able to change a brand from one day to another if it's 100 years old. The older the brand is, the longer it will take to change the perception of that brand. If you have a new brand, it's easy because that's what everybody knows you by. So if you start with a clean slate, obviously you're actually branding, you're not rebranding. But it can be done. We've done it, I would say, in record time within about 12 to 15 months now, where Sala Rugby is a brand that we own, that is trademarked in France, that had you searched for it a year ago, there were 0 searches on Google. Today, it's searched between 10 and 15,000 times on Google.
Wow.
As a result of all of the aggregate of the combined media initiatives we've taken forward, including the media that's covering and finding about our project, and interviews, podcasts such as this one, television segments, and whatnot.
Well, I think that really explains and sells this important process to the teams out there that want to make that big step. But some of their fans, like you said, might be resisting a little. What arguments can you give to team managers or coaches or presidents to help them convince their fans that this is the step that they need to take?
I think if you're a team manager or coach, staff member, the question you should ask yourself is, would I like my team to have more resources? If I'm playing rugby, would I like to have more balls, more equipment? If I'm playing football/soccer, would I like to have better players on my team, better trainers, better gyms? All of this requires incremental resources that most amateur teams do not have today, and that require business development, forward thinking, and a different approach. So if that's what you're looking for, you've knocked at the right door.
Fantastic. Well, I think that wraps up our segment on rebranding. Unless, Dom, you have anything you want to add to the teams?
Yeah, we're playing on Sunday, and I want to get you the odds for the game from a diehard rugby fan like yourself.
Fantastic. Well, given that Sala Rugby is yet to lose a game, I think we're on a good track. I'd say the odds are pretty good in our favor. But I certainly wouldn't be betting on the other team, that's for sure. Well, thank you so much, Dom, for your time and for explaining this crucial step that many teams could looking to be taken in the future. I know that CX Sports is bringing you every week a new tool in your toolbox to help your team excel and take it to the next level. I look forward to our next chat together, Dom. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jasper.
And thank you so much to our listeners. I hope you get in touch. The links below will be for CX Sports, all of our tools, and more information. Thank you so much and have a great day. Subscribe and stay tuned for more episodes. Join the community at CX Sports 1 on Facebook. We will give you the tools you need to make your club stand out and succeed.